Nathan's shot rang out in the moonlit silence. The man with the bottle went down screaming, lamp oil spreading across the snow like blood. The other two froze, staring at the drifter who'd appeared from nowhere, his Colt already aimed at the next target. "Tell Frank Dawson." Nathan's voice cut through the Montana cold. "If he wants this land, he'll have to come get it himself." That was the night everything changed. But to understand how a wandering cowboy became the only thing standing between a widow, her child, and a killer who owned an entire territory, we need to go back. Back to a different night, a colder night. The night Nathan Cole's horse threw a shoe 3 miles from a cabin the whole world called cursed. The wind came down from the mountains like a living thing, cold and relentless, carrying with it the promise of snow. Nathan Cole pulled the collar of his worn leather coat tighter around his neck and squinted against the gathering dusk. The sky had turned the color of old iron, heavy with clouds that seemed to press down upon the endless Montana plains. He had been riding for 12 days straight, moving 50 head of cattle from the Johnson Ranch to the stockyards in Great Falls, and his body carried the weariness of every mile. Copper, his buckskin mare, stumbled slightly beneath him. Nathan felt it immediately, that slight hitch in her gait that sent a cold spike of worry through his chest. He dismounted quickly, his boots crunching in the thin layer of frost that had already begun to form on the ground. The mare stood patiently as he ran his hands down her right foreleg, and his heart sank when he felt the heat and swelling just above her fetlock. The ground squirrel hole had been invisible in the fading light. Copper had stepped into it wrong, and now the tendon was badly strained. Nathan straightened slowly, his hand resting on the mare's neck. He looked around at the desolate landscape stretching in every direction. The nearest town was 30 miles behind him, and the temperature was dropping fast. Within hours, this would be deadly country for a man on foot with an injured horse. He thought about his options, running through them with the methodical calm of a man who had faced hard choices before. He could leave Copper here, take what supplies he could carry, and walk back to civilization. The cattle buyers in Great Falls were waiting, and the job would pay him 3 months' wages. That money was meant for something important. For 18 years, Nathan had drifted from ranch to ranch, job to job, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But lately, something had changed inside him. He was tired of being a man with no fixed place in the world. The money from this cattle drive was going to buy him a small piece of land, nothing fancy, just enough to build a cabin and maybe raise a few horses. A place to finally call his own. But leaving Copper meant the mare would likely die in the cold. And Nathan Cole had made himself a promise years ago, a promise carved into his soul by grief and regret. He would never abandon anyone who depended on him. Not ever again. The memory came unbidden, as it always did when he faced moments like this. Thomas. His only friend from the orphanage, a boy with a quick laugh and kind eyes who had died of consumption when they were both 19. Nathan had been working 3 jobs back then, trying to save enough money for the medicine Thomas needed. But the money had come too late. He could still see Thomas's face in those final moments, still hear his friend's labored breathing, still feel the weight of failure that had settled in his chest and never quite left. "I will never leave anyone behind again," Nathan had whispered over Thomas's grave. "Not as long as I draw breath." And so the choice was already made, really. It had been made 13 years ago in a cemetery in Denver. Nathan would stay with Copper. He would find shelter, tend to her injury, and pray that both of them survived long enough for the mare to heal. He led Copper slowly forward, scanning the darkening landscape for any sign of human habitation. The plains here were supposed to be empty, a wild stretch of territory that settlers avoided. But then, through the gathering snow that had just begun to fall, he saw it. A thin column of smoke rising into the gray sky, barely visible, but unmistakable. Where there was smoke, there was shelter. And where there was shelter, there might be help. Nathan altered course, leading Copper toward the smoke. As they drew closer, the outline of a small cabin emerged from the gloom. It sat nestled against a rocky hillside, half hidden by a stand of pine trees. The cabin looked solid enough, built from good timber, with a stone chimney from which that precious smoke curled upward. But as Nathan approached, he began to notice things that made the hair on the back of his neck rise. The path leading to the cabin was overgrown, choked with weeds and brambles, as though no one had walked it in months. The fence surrounding the property was broken in several places, posts leaning at odd angles. And there, nailed to the gatepost, was a crude wooden cross hung upside down. Carved into the weathered wood beneath it were words that had been burned black, cursed, "Stay away." Nathan stopped his hand instinctively, moving to the Colt revolver at his hip. He had seen enough of the frontier to know that sometimes warnings were meant to be heeded. But Copper whinnied softly beside him, and he felt the mare's body beginning to shiver. The temperature had dropped another few degrees in just the last few minutes. Whatever lay ahead, they needed shelter now. He tied Copper to what remained of the fence and approached the cabin door on foot. Up close he could see that the windows had been boarded over, not from the inside as one might do to keep out winter cold, but from the outside, the boards nailed across the glass as though to seal something in, or to keep something out. Before Nathan could knock, he heard a sound from inside. A woman's voice, low and urgent, speaking to someone else. He couldn't make out all the words, but the tone was clear enough. Fear and determination. "If anyone comes, you hide in the cellar. You don't come out no matter what happens. Do you understand me, Clara? No matter what." A child's voice responded, trembling but obedient. "Yes, Mama." Nathan's hand dropped from his gun. Whatever was happening here, it involved a woman and a child alone. He knocked 3 firm raps that echoed in the cold air. Silence answered him, complete and absolute. He could almost feel the people inside holding their breath, could imagine them frozen in place, terrified by the sound of a stranger at their door. "Ma'am," Nathan called out, keeping his voice calm and respectful. "I mean you no harm. My horse is injured and the storm is coming on fast. I'm just looking for shelter, nothing more. If you could spare a corner of your barn or shed, I'd be grateful." More silence. Then the sound of footsteps, slow and cautious. The door opened just a crack held by a chain from inside. Through the narrow gap, Nathan found himself looking into a pair of brown eyes that held equal measures of terror and fierce protectiveness. The woman was perhaps 30 years old, though hard living might have made her seem older than she was. Her face was pale and drawn, her auburn hair pulled back in a simple braid that hung over one shoulder. She gripped a broom handle in both hands, holding it like a weapon, though Nathan could see her arms trembling with the effort. "Who are you?" Her voice was steady despite the fear he could see in her eyes. "What do you want?" "My name is Nathan Cole, ma'am. I've been moving cattle from the Johnson Ranch to Great Falls. My mare threw a shoe and strained her leg about 3 miles back. I saw your smoke and hoped you might have a place where I could tend to her until the storm passes. People don't come here." The woman's knuckles were white on the broom handle. "They say this cabin is cursed. They say tragedy lives within these walls. If you stay, they'll say you're cursed too." Nathan met her gaze squarely. "Ma'am, I don't believe in curses. I believe in kindness, hard work, and the good Lord above, but I respect your fear. I truly do. So I'll make you this offer." He reached up slowly, making sure she could see every movement, and unbuttoned his heavy coat. He pulled it off and held it out toward the gap in the door. "This coat is thick. If I was carrying a weapon hidden on me, you'd see it now through this thin shirt. I'm giving you proof I mean no harm. All I'm asking is permission to shelter my horse in that old shed I saw on the far side of your property. I'll stay there with her. You'll never have to see me or speak to me again." The woman stared at the coat, then at Nathan's face, clearly stunned by the gesture. A gust of wind cut through the clearing, and Nathan's body jerked involuntarily at the cold that knifed through his thin shirt. He held the coat out steadily, waiting. "Mama," a small voice called from inside. "The horse is shaking." The woman's eyes darted past Nathan to where Copper stood tied to the fence. In the failing light, the mare's distress was obvious. Her head hung low, her body trembling, one leg held carefully off the ground. Something shifted in the woman's face. The fear didn't leave, but it was joined by something else, compassion perhaps, or the memory of her own suffering. I'm Margaret Bennett, she said quietly. But folks call me Maggie. That's my daughter Clara. You can bring your horse into the old shed. There's some hay left in there, not much but enough. And you can come inside for some warmth, Mr. Cole. But I want you to know that I have a rifle, and it will be pointed at you the entire time you're under my roof. Nathan nodded slowly. That's fair, Mrs. Bennett, and I appreciate your kindness more than you know. He put his coat back on and led Copper around to the shed. The structure was old but still sound, protected from the worst of the wind. Nathan settled the mare inside, speaking to her in low, soothing tones as he examined her leg more carefully. The swelling was significant, but he didn't think anything was broken. With rest and cold compresses, Copper should recover. But it would take time, at least a week, maybe 10 days. As he worked, Nathan became aware of a small face peering at him from around the corner of the shed. A little girl, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with brown curls and eyes that were exact copies of her mother's. She wore a dress that had been mended many times, patches layered upon patches, but it was clean, and the repairs had been done with care. "Your horse is very pretty," the girl said softly. "What's her name?" "This is Copper," Nathan replied, not making any sudden movements that might scare the child. "She's been my friend for about 5 years now." "Does her leg hurt very bad?" "I expect it does, Miss Clara, but she's tough. She'll heal if we give her time and care." Clara moved a little closer, fascinated despite her obvious nervousness. "My papa used to have a horse. His name was Thunder because Papa said he could run as fast as a storm. But Thunder went away after Papa died." Nathan's hand stilled on Copper's leg. "I'm very sorry about your father, Miss Clara." "Thank you." The girl's voice was matter-of-fact, in the way that children sometimes are when discussing tragedy they don't fully understand. "He died 2 winters ago. Mama says he's in heaven now, but I miss him terrible." "I'm sure you do." "Clara." Maggie's voice cut through the cold air, sharp with worry. The woman appeared a moment later, moving quickly to place herself between Nathan and her daughter. "I told you to stay inside." "But Mama, the horse needed a blanket. She was so cold." Clara held up an old woolen blanket, threadbare and patched but clean. "I brought her one of ours." Maggie's face went through a series of emotions too quick to read. Finally, she took the blanket from her daughter and looked at Nathan with something that might have been an apology. "Thank you, Miss Clara," Nathan said, accepting the blanket and draping it carefully over Copper's back. "That was very kind of you. Copper and I are both grateful." The little girl smiled, a genuine bright smile that transformed her face. It was clear that smiles had been rare visitors to this cabin for a long time. Maggie took Clara's hand. "Come inside now. It's too cold out here." She looked at Nathan, and he saw her making some kind of internal decision. "Mr. Cole, I've put some soup on to warm. You're welcome to come in and have some before you settle in the shed for the night." "That's very generous of you, Mrs. Bennett." Inside the cabin was sparse but scrupulously clean. A fire burned in the stone hearth, providing the only warmth and light. The furniture consisted of a rough wooden table, 2 chairs, a narrow bed in one corner where Clara presumably slept, and little else. On the table sat a single loaf of bread that looked as hard as stone, and Nathan's experienced eye told him it was probably 4 or 5 days old. There was almost no food visible anywhere in the cabin. These people were starving. The realization hit Nathan like a physical blow. Maggie ladled thin potato soup into wooden bowls. The portions she gave Nathan and Clara were generous, but the amount she served herself was barely more than a few spoonfuls. Nathan saw this and understood. A mother sacrificing to feed her child. "Mrs. Bennett," he said carefully, "I have supplies in my saddlebags. Dried beef beans, flour, coffee. Trail rations, nothing fancy, but more than I need for myself. I'd be obliged if you'd accept them as payment for the shelter you're providing." Maggie's back stiffened. "We don't need charity, Mr. Cole." "And I'm not offering charity, ma'am." Nathan kept his voice respectful but firm. "You're providing shelter that's saving my life and my horse's life. In my book, that's worth fair payment. I won't feel right accepting your hospitality without offering something in return. A man of honor pays his debts. The mention of honor seemed to touch something in Maggie. Her rigid posture softened slightly. Clara looked between her mother and Nathan with wide, hopeful eyes. "Please, Mama," the girl whispered. "We haven't had real coffee in so long." Maggie closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was moisture along the lashes. "Very well, Mr. Cole. We'll accept your supplies as payment for shelter. Thank you." They ate in silence for a while, Clara consuming her soup with the kind of hunger that spoke of many missed meals. Nathan found himself watching the child, feeling something unfamiliar stir in his chest. She reminded him of the children at St. Michael's Orphanage, that same combination of resilience and vulnerability. "Mr. Cole," Clara said suddenly, "are you a real cowboy?" Nathan smiled. "I reckon I am, Miss Clara. Mama says cowboys are very brave. They ride through all kinds of danger." "Well, your mama is partly right. Cowboys do face danger sometimes. But can I tell you a secret?" Clara leaned forward, eyes wide. "What?" "Cowboys get scared just like everyone else. The difference is we don't let fear stop us from doing what needs to be done." "That's not really bravery. That's just stubbornness." Clara giggled, and the sound was like music in the cold cabin. Maggie watched her daughter's face with an expression that broke Nathan's heart. It was clear the woman couldn't remember the last time she'd heard her child laugh. After the meal, Nathan retrieved his saddlebags and brought them inside. He spread out his supplies on the table: dried beef, a sack of beans, flour, salt, and a small bag of precious coffee. Maggie stared at the food as though it were a miracle. "Mr. Cole, this is too much. It's a fair trade, Mrs. Bennet, and please, call me Nathan." After Clara was settled in bed, already drifting off to sleep with a full belly, perhaps for the first time in weeks, Maggie poured 2 cups of coffee. She and Nathan sat at the table, the fire crackling softly in the hearth. "You should leave in the morning," Maggie said quietly, her hands wrapped around the warm cup. "People will talk if they learn you came here." "Let them talk. I've never been one to live by other people's opinions." "You don't understand." Maggie's voice was tight with old pain. "My husband Daniel, he was a good man, a hard worker, but he believed in giving everyone a fair chance regardless of their past. He hired workers that others wouldn't touch, former prisoners trying to rebuild their lives, men and women society had thrown away. The town hated him for it." She paused, staring into the fire. "When he died from fever, people said it was punishment. They said God had struck him down for his sins. They stopped trading with us. They refused to sell us supplies. We've been surviving on what we can grow and hunt ever since." Nathan leaned forward. "Mrs. Bennet, your husband sounds like one of the finest men who ever lived. Anyone who would punish a widow and child for the kindness of their kin is no Christian in my book. They're cowards, plain and simple." Tears spilled down Maggie's cheeks and she wiped them away quickly. "You're the first person to say that in 2 years, Mr. Cole. Call me Nathan, and I mean every word." Maggie stood and walked to a small wooden box on the shelf above the fireplace. From it, she withdrew a small brown bottle and brought it back to the table. "I want to show you something," she said. "I found this near our well 3 days after Daniel took sick. It still smells strange, like some kind of chemical. I think it's poison. I think someone put it in our well to kill my husband." Nathan took the bottle and sniffed carefully. The smell was faint but distinctive. Arsenic. He'd encountered it before at ranches where it was used to kill rats. "Have you told anyone about this?" "The sheriff." Maggie's voice was bitter. "Tom Bradford. He's friends with Frank Dawson, the man who I think did this. The sheriff said I was mad with grief, seeing conspiracies where there were none. He wouldn't even look at the bottle." "Tell me about Frank Dawson." Maggie took a shaky breath. "Frank owns most of Hollow Creek, the nearest town. He's the blacksmith, but he's also a landowner and the most powerful man in the territory. 4 years ago, when Daniel first came here, Frank tried to sell him a piece of land. Said it was good property worth the high price he was asking. But Daniel discovered the land had no water source. Frank had lied. Daniel not only refused to buy it, he publicly called Frank out in front of the whole town, told everyone what Frank had tried to do." I imagine Frank didn't take kindly to that. Frank never forgot, and he never forgave. Maggie's voice dropped to barely a whisper. 3 days before Daniel got sick, Frank came to our property. Said he wanted to inspect the well because he'd heard there might be a crack in the stone lining. Daniel was away in town that day. Frank was alone at the well for nearly an hour. Nathan sat back processing this information. It was a story he'd heard variations of before out here on the frontier, where law was thin and corrupt men often wielded more power than badges. A man trying to do right, struck down by someone wealthy enough to avoid consequences. Why does Frank want your land so badly? I didn't know until Reverend Hayes told me. There's an underground spring beneath this property. Not just any spring, the largest source of fresh water in the region. Whoever controls it could control water access for dozens of miles around. Frank knows this. If he owned this land, he could charge people for water. He'd become even richer and more powerful. Nathan looked around the modest cabin, understanding now the true nature of what he'd stumbled into. This wasn't just a widow struggling to survive. This was a woman fighting to hold on to land that a powerful man wanted, land he'd apparently been willing to kill for. Why haven't you left, started fresh somewhere else? Maggie's eyes filled with tears again. Because this cabin is the last place I still feel Daniel near me. He built every inch of it with his own hands. Every board, every nail carries his sweat and his love. If I leave, I lose him completely. And this land, this is what Daniel died protecting. If I give it up, then he died for nothing. Nathan understood. He understood in a way that surprised him with its intensity, because he'd spent his whole life running from place to place, never having anything or anyone worth staying for. And here was this woman standing her ground against impossible odds because of love and principle. Mrs. Bennett, Maggie, may I ask you something? Of course. Do you want to keep this land, or do you want to keep it because you feel you have to honor Daniel's memory? Maggie considered this carefully. Both. I want Clara to grow up here. I want her to know that her father built something good, something worth fighting for. I want her to understand that when you're in the right, you don't back down just because powerful people tell you to. Nathan nodded slowly. Then you should keep it, and you should fight for it. But how? I'm just one woman. Frank has the whole town in his pocket. You're not alone anymore. Maggie stared at him. What are you saying? Nathan chose his words carefully. I'm saying that Copper needs at least 10 days to heal before she can travel. I'm saying that I have nothing waiting for me in Great Falls that can't wait a little longer. And I'm saying that a cabin this size in winter needs work to stay sound. If you'd permit me, I'd like to spend those 10 days making sure this place is secure. Fixing what needs fixing. Chopping enough wood to get you through the cold months. Mr. Cole, Nathan, you don't owe us anything. Maybe not. But I owe myself something. I owe it to myself not to walk away when I can help. Not this time. There was something in his voice that made Maggie look at him more closely. She saw the shadows in his eyes, the weight of old regrets. What happened? She asked gently. Who did you leave behind? Nathan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he rarely showed. His name was Thomas. We grew up together at St. Michael's Orphanage in Denver. He was the only real family I ever had. When we were 19, Thomas got consumption. I was working 3 jobs trying to save money for medicine, but I couldn't save fast enough. He died in a charity ward calling for me, and I couldn't afford to be there because I was working to earn money that came too late to matter. Nathan's hands clenched on the table. I made a promise over his grave. I said I would never abandon anyone who needed me, not ever again, no matter what it cost me. Copper threw that shoe 3 miles from here. I could have left her and walked to the nearest town, could have sent someone back for her later maybe, but I'd made a promise, and keeping that promise led me here to you and Clara. Maybe that's not coincidence. Maybe that's the universe giving me a chance to do right. Maggie reached across the table and placed her hand over his. It was the first time she'd voluntarily touched another human being besides her daughter in nearly 2 years. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for staying." That night Nathan made his bed in the old shed with Copper. The mare was resting more comfortably now, the swelling in her leg already starting to go down. Nathan lay on a pile of old hay wrapped in his coat and the blanket Clara had brought and stared up at the rough wooden ceiling. He'd come here looking for shelter from a storm, but he'd found something else, a purpose, a reason to be more than just a drifter passing through. The wind howled outside and Nathan thought about the 10 days ahead. He thought about Maggie's fierce love for her daughter, about the way Clara had smiled when she petted Copper about the bottle of poison and the powerful man who'd apparently committed murder to get what he wanted. Nathan Cole had no illusions about being a hero. He was just a cowboy, a man who'd failed the people he loved before. But maybe, just maybe, he could keep his promise this time. Maybe he could be the kind of man Thomas had believed he could be. Outside the storm intensified, and inside the cabin for the first time in 2 years, Maggie Bennett slept without nightmares, knowing there was someone watching over her family. Morning came cold and clear. Nathan woke to find a thin layer of snow covering everything, turning the world into something pristine and new. He tended to Copper, first changing the cold compress on her leg and making sure she had food and water. Then he walked around the property, assessing what needed to be done. The list was long. The roof had several places where shingles had come loose. The fence was in terrible repair. The woodpile was dangerously low for winter. The old shed where he'd spent the night needed its door rehung. There was work here for weeks, not just days. He was examining the fence when Clara emerged from the cabin, moving carefully through the snow. She carried a plate covered with a cloth. "Mama made breakfast," she said shyly. "She said to bring you some." Under the cloth were 2 thick slices of bread fried in a pan with some of the bacon fat from Nathan's supplies and a boiled egg. It was simple food, but Nathan could see the care that had gone into preparing it. "Thank you, Miss Clara. This looks wonderful." "Mr. Nathan, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are you going to stay? Mama said you might stay for a few days, but I was wondering if maybe you could stay longer." Nathan knelt down to be at eye level with the child. "Why do you want me to stay, Clara?" The girl's eyes filled with tears. "Because Mama hasn't smiled in so long, but last night after you went to the shed, I heard her humming while she cleaned up. She used to hum all the time when Papa was alive, and because I'm scared of the bad men who come at night sometimes, but I think they'd be scared of you." Nathan's blood went cold. "Bad men? What bad men?" Clara looked around nervously as if afraid of being overheard. "Sometimes at night I hear voices outside, and once I looked out the window and saw men with torches standing at the edge of the woods just watching our cabin. Mama told me not to worry, but I know she's scared too. She keeps Papa's rifle by her bed, even though she told me it doesn't have any bullets left." Nathan stood slowly, his jaw tight with anger. So Frank Dawson wasn't content with having killed Daniel Bennett. He was continuing to terrorize the man's widow and child. "Clara, I want you to listen to me very carefully. Those men, if they come back, I need you to do exactly what your mama tells you. Hide if she says hide. Run if she says run. Can you promise me that?" "I promise. But Mr. Nathan, you won't let them hurt Mama, will you?" Nathan looked into those trusting eyes and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This child, this brave little girl who'd lost her father and lived in fear, but still found the kindness to bring a blanket to a cold horse, deserved better. They both did. "No, Clara," he said quietly. "I won't let anyone hurt your mama. That's a promise." When Maggie came out an hour later, she found Nathan already hard at work repairing the fence. He'd taken tools from the shed and was replacing rotten posts with new ones cut from fallen trees at the edge of the property. "Mr. Cole, you don't have to do this." Nathan didn't stop working. "I know, but Copper needs time to heal, and I need something to keep me busy. Idle hands and all that." Maggie watched him work for a moment. There was something solid and reassuring about the way he moved, methodical and sure. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed having someone else to share the burden of keeping this place running. "Clara told me about the men," Nathan said, not looking up from his work. Maggie's face went pale. "I told her not to worry about that. Mrs. Bennet, Maggie, you can't protect her from the truth. And the truth is, you're in danger here, both of you." "I know." Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. "But where would we go? I have no money, no family, nowhere to run. This cabin is all we have." Nathan stopped working and straightened up. "Then we make sure it's defensible. We make sure that if those men come back, they find more than a frightened woman and a child. They find someone ready to stand and fight. You do that risk yourself for people you barely know." Nathan met her eyes steadily. "I made a choice last night, Maggie. I chose to stay. And when Nathan Cole makes a choice, he sees it through. That's all I know how to be." For the first time since Daniel's death, Maggie felt a spark of something she'd thought was gone forever. Hope. The rest of that first day set a pattern that would continue for the days to come. Nathan worked from dawn until dusk, repairing buildings, securing. Maggie cooked meals that grew more substantial as they drew on Nathan's supplies. Clara followed Nathan around like a shadow, asking endless questions about horses and cattle and the wide world beyond their isolated cabin. And slowly, so slowly that none of them quite noticed it happening, the cabin began to feel less like a prison and more like a home. By the 8th day, Nathan had settled into a rhythm at the cabin that felt almost natural. He woke before dawn each morning, tended to Copper, whose leg was healing remarkably well, then spent the daylight hours working on whatever the property needed most. The roof was patched. Now the fence stood straight and strong, and the woodpile had grown to a respectable size that would see Maggie and Clara through the worst of winter. But on the morning of the 8th day, something changed. Nathan was splitting logs behind the cabin when Copper whinnied from inside the shed, a sound of distress that brought him running. The mare was agitated, ears pinned back, nostrils flaring. Nathan calmed her with soft words and gentle hands, but his eyes were scanning the area around the shed. That's when he saw them. Footprints in the snow. Fresh ones made sometime during the night, not animal tracks. Boot prints. 3 different sets judging by the size and tread patterns. The tracks circled the entire cabin, pausing at each window, lingering near the door. Whoever had made them had stood watching the cabin for a long time. Nathan could tell by the depth of the impressions where they'd remained still observing. He followed the tracks to the edge of the woods where they disappeared into the trees. But before they vanished completely, he found something else. Scratched into the bark of a pine tree with what looked like a knife blade were words that made his blood run cold. "Leave or die." Nathan stood there for a long moment, his breath misting in the cold air, his hand resting on the butt of his Colt. So it was coming to that. Frank Dawson wasn't content to wait. The pressure was increasing. He decided not to tell Maggie about the tracks or the message, not yet. There was no point in frightening her more than she already was. Instead, he made a decision. Starting that night, he would patrol the perimeter of the property after dark. If those men came back, he would be ready. The 9th day brought a new horror. Maggie discovered it first, her scream bringing Nathan running from where he'd been working on the shed door. She stood outside the cabin, one hand pressed to her mouth, staring at the ground near the front steps. 4 chickens lay there in a neat row, their necks wrung, their bodies arranged with deliberate care. These were the only chickens Maggie had left, the last remnants of the small flock that had once provided eggs for her and Clara. Now they were gone, killed not for food, but as a message. Clara came running from inside, saw the dead birds, and burst into tears. No, not Henrietta, not Molly. Nathan's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. The chickens had names. Clara had loved them as pets. And someone had murdered them just to send a message of fear. He gathered up the small bodies while Maggie held her sobbing daughter. Later, after Clara had cried herself to sleep, Nathan buried the chickens behind the shed and examined the area where they'd been left. More boot prints, the same 3 sets as before. But this time, there was something new. Pressed into the snow near where the chickens had lain was a clear impression of something metal. Nathan studied it carefully, then pulled out his knife and made a quick sketch in his notebook. The impression showed a snake coiled around a hammer. It was a mark he'd seen before on metalwork, the kind of signature a skilled blacksmith might use. Frank Dawson's signature. That night, Nathan didn't sleep. He sat in the shed with his back against the wall, his Colt loaded and ready, watching the darkness beyond the cabin. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see shapes and movement. Around midnight, he heard it. The soft crunch of boots on snow coming from the direction of the forest. 3 figures emerged from the tree line, moving with the confidence of men who thought themselves unseen and unopposed. They carried no torches this time, relying on the moonlight to guide them. Nathan watched as they approached the cabin, saw one of them pull something from his coat. In the pale light, Nathan could see the gleam of glass. A bottle. He was out of the shed in seconds, moving silently through the snow. When he was close enough, he cocked the hammer of his Colt, the sound sharp and unmistakable in the quiet night. "That's far enough, gentlemen." The 3 men froze. Slowly they turned. In the moonlight, Nathan could see their faces clearly. 2 were younger men he didn't recognize, probably hired hands. But the third was older, with a face that had the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades working over a forge. "Who the hell are you?" the older man demanded, though his voice carried less authority than he probably intended. "I'm the man who lives here now," Nathan said calmly, "and I'm the man who's going to give you one chance to walk away. Drop whatever you're holding and leave. Don't come back. This doesn't concern you, Drifter. Frank Dawson owns this land, or he will soon enough. The widow just doesn't know it yet. The widow knows exactly what's happening. And so do I. You're trespassing on her property. You killed her chickens. And judging by that bottle in your friend's hand, you were about to do something far worse." The younger man holding the bottle shifted nervously. "We were just going to set a small fire, scare 'em a little. Mr. Dawson said to encourage them to leave. By burning them out." Nathan's voice was hard as iron. "With a woman and child sleeping inside." The older man spat into the snow. "Look, friend, you don't know what you're getting into. Frank Dawson runs this territory. You cross him, you'll end up in a grave next to Daniel Bennett." It was a confession casually delivered, and Nathan filed it away in his memory. "Is that what happened to Daniel? Did Frank have you boys help with that too?" The man's eyes widened slightly, realizing he'd said too much. "I don't know nothing about Daniel Bennett, except he died of fever. Natural causes. Now step aside before someone gets hurt." "Someone will get hurt," Nathan agreed. "But it won't be me, and it won't be the woman and child in that cabin. Last chance. Walk away." For a tense moment the 3 men stood frozen, weighing their options. Then the younger one with the bottle made his choice. He raised his arm to throw the bottle toward the cabin. Nathan's shot took him in the shoulder before the bottle left his hand. The glass shattered on the ground, spreading lamp oil across the snow. The young man went down screaming, clutching his wounded shoulder. The other 2 men stared in shock. Nathan's Colt was already aimed at the older man's chest. "He'll live if he gets that shoulder bandaged proper," Nathan said calmly. "But the next man who makes a move toward that cabin gets a bullet somewhere more permanent. Now pick up your friend and get off this property. And you tell Frank Dawson that if he wants this land, he'll have to come get it himself. No more hired hands, no more messages in the dark. If he's got the courage, tell him to come face the people he's trying to terrorize." The 2 uninjured men grabbed their wounded companion and half dragged, half carried him back toward the forest. Nathan stood watching until they disappeared into the trees, then waited another 20 minutes to make sure they weren't circling back. When he finally turned toward the cabin, Maggie was standing on the porch, Daniel's old rifle in her hands. In the moonlight, her face was pale but determined. "I heard the shot," she said quietly. "Are they gone? For now? Will they come back?" Nathan climbed the steps to stand beside her. "Yes. But next time it won't be hired hands doing the dirty work. I made sure of that. I challenged Frank Dawson directly. A man like that can't ignore a challenge without looking weak." Maggie's hands tightened on the rifle. "Then I've put you in terrible danger." "No," Nathan said gently. "Frank Dawson put himself in danger the moment he decided to terrorize a widow and her child. I just made sure he knows there's a price to pay for that choice. They stood together in silence for a moment, both looking out at the dark forest. "Nathan," Maggie said softly, "why are you really doing this? The truth this time." He took a long breath. "Because for 18 years I've been running from place to place, telling myself I was free because I had no ties, no responsibilities. But I wasn't free. I was just empty. And then I came here and I saw you and Clara, and I saw people who were fighting for something that mattered. Not for wealth or power, but for home and memory and principle. I want to be part of something like that. I want to matter to someone. Is that selfish?" "No," Maggie whispered. "That's human." She reached out and took his hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like crossing a bridge neither of them had known was there. "Whatever happens," she said, "thank you for being here. Thank you for making us feel less alone." Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "You're not alone anymore. I promise you that." The 10th day brought an unexpected visitor. Nathan was working on reinforcing the cabin's shutters when he heard a horse approaching. His hand went to his gun, but he relaxed when he saw the rider was an old man, easily 70 years old, riding a sway-backed mule. The old-timer raised one hand in a peaceful gesture as he approached. "Easy there, son. I'm not here to cause trouble. Name's Pete McCormick. I live about 5 miles that way in the woods." He gestured vaguely toward the east. "Been watching you work on this place the past few days. Figured it was time we had a talk." Nathan helped the old man dismount. Up close, Pete McCormick had the look of someone who'd spent a lifetime in the wilderness. His face was weathered to the color of old leather, his eyes sharp and knowing beneath bushy white eyebrows. "Mr. McCormick, what can I do for you?" "It's what I can do for you, son, or rather, what I can tell you." Pete glanced toward the cabin. "Mrs. Bennett home. She and Clara went down to the creek to fetch water." "Good. Then we can talk plain." Pete fixed Nathan with a steady gaze. "You know you're living in a cursed place, right? That's what folks say. But curses don't exist. What exists are evil men who profit from other people's fear. Frank Dawson is about as evil as they come out here. I've gathered that much." "Have you gathered that he killed Daniel Bennett? Not with his own hands, maybe, but he arranged it sure enough. I saw him and another fella named Caleb Wright come to this property late one night about 2.5 years back. I was hunting night game moving quiet through the woods. Saw them go to the well with a bottle of something, watched them pour it in. 3 days later, Daniel Bennett was dead." Nathan felt his pulse quicken. "Did you tell anyone, the sheriff?" Pete spat into the dirt. "Sheriff Bradford. That man's got about as much spine as a jellyfish. He's in Frank's pocket, has been for years. I tried to tell him what I saw. He told me I was a crazy old man seeing things in the dark, warned me that spreading lies about upstanding citizens could get a man in serious trouble. So Frank got away with murder." "He did. And he'll keep getting away with it unless someone stands up to him. Someone who can't be intimidated or bought off." Pete studied Nathan carefully. "You look like maybe you could be that someone. But I gotta warn you, son. Frank Dawson doesn't fight fair. He's got money power and enough hired guns to make life real difficult for anyone who crosses him." "I've already crossed him." "I know. I heard about the shooting last night. Word travels fast out here. That's actually why I came. To tell you that you just started a war whether you meant to or not. And in a war with Frank Dawson, you need all the help you can get." Nathan nodded slowly. "What kind of help are you offering, Mr. McCormick?" "Information for starters. And when the time comes, maybe a rifle and a steady hand. I'm old, but I can still shoot straight. And I owe it to Daniel Bennett's memory to see his killer brought to justice." Over the next hour, Pete McCormick told Nathan everything he knew about Frank Dawson's operations. The blacksmith owned not just his forge, but also controlled most of the land deals in Hollow Creek. He'd been systematically buying up property, sometimes through legitimate means, sometimes through intimidation and fraud. The spring beneath Maggie's property was the crown jewel, the one piece Frank needed to control the water supply for the entire region. He's got the sheriff in his pocket, like I said. Tom Bradford owes Frank money. His wife's sick, needs expensive medicine from back east. Frank's been paying for it, but that makes the sheriff beholden. He won't move against Frank no matter what evidence you bring him. What about a federal marshal? The nearest marshal's office is 300 miles away in Helena. By the time you could get there and back with help, Frank would have finished what he started here. No, if you're going to stop him, it has to be done local, and it has to be done smart. Nathan absorbed this information, his mind already working through possibilities. You mentioned Daniel hired some former prisoners to work for him. Do you know where they are now? Pete's eyes lit up. Now that's smart thinking. Yeah, I know where at least 2 of them ended up. Jacob Freeman's living in a shack about 5 miles south of here. Samuel O'Brien found work at the mill in Riverside. Thomas Redwood, the third one, he moves around a lot, but I saw him in these woods just last week hunting. Would they help? For Daniel Bennett's widow and daughter, and for a chance to see Frank Dawson face justice? I expect they would. Those 3 men loved Daniel like a brother. He was the only person who gave them a second chance when the whole world had given up on them. After Pete left, Nathan sat on the porch of the cabin thinking hard. He was beginning to see the shape of what needed to be done. He couldn't fight Frank Dawson alone, and he couldn't rely on official law enforcement. But if he could gather allies, people who had their own reasons to want Frank brought down, maybe they could build a case strong enough that even a corrupt sheriff couldn't ignore it. That night, after Clara was asleep, Nathan told Maggie about Pete's visit and what the old man had revealed. He also told her about his plan to find the 3 men Daniel had employed. Maggie listened carefully, her face thoughtful in the firelight. When Nathan finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "There's something I need to tell you," she finally said. "Something I haven't told anyone." She went to the shelf above the fireplace and retrieved an old Bible. From between its pages, she withdrew a folded letter yellowed with age. Daniel wrote this 3 days before he died. He was feeling poorly, thought it was just a bad cold, but he wanted to get his affairs in order just in case. He was always practical like that. Her voice caught slightly. He never got to mail it, but I think you should read it. Nathan unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was shaky, written by a man who was already sick, but the words were clear enough. "To whom it may concern," it read, "my name is Daniel Bennett, and I am writing this letter in sound mind and body to report a crime. 4 years ago, Frank Dawson attempted to defraud me by selling me land he knew to be worthless. When I exposed his fraud publicly, he swore revenge. Since that time, he has systematically worked to destroy my reputation and my livelihood. Now I have reason to believe he intends to do me physical harm. 3 days ago, Frank came to my property under the pretense of inspecting my well. He was alone with that well for nearly an hour. Since then, the water has tasted strange, and I have developed symptoms of illness. If anything should happen to me, I want it known that I suspect Frank Dawson of attempting murder. I have taken a sample of the well water and hidden it in a safe place. I pray this letter never needs to be read, but if you are reading it, then my worst fears have come true. Please protect my wife Margaret and my daughter Clara. They are innocent in all this, and please bring Frank Dawson to justice. Daniel Bennett." Nathan read the letter twice, his hands trembling slightly with anger. "Where's the water sample he mentioned?" "I never found it. I searched everywhere after he died, but I couldn't locate it. Maybe he was too sick by then to remember where he'd hidden it, or maybe Frank found it and destroyed it. But we have this letter. And we have the poison bottle you found. That's 2 pieces of evidence. Evidence that Sheriff Bradford refused to look at. Then we'll find someone who will look at it. We'll build a case so strong that even Bradford can't ignore it." Nathan folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Maggie. "But first I need to find those 3 men, Jacob, Samuel, and Thomas. With them as witnesses to Daniel's character, and with this letter and the bottle, we start to have a real case." Maggie's eyes filled with tears, but they were tears of hope this time, not despair. "Do you really think we can do this? Do you really think we can bring Frank to justice?" Nathan took both of her hands in his. "I think we have to try. For Daniel, for Clara, for everyone else Frank has hurt and will hurt if he's not stopped." They sat close together by the fire, hands clasped, and Nathan felt something shift between them. It was no longer just about protecting Maggie and Clara from immediate danger. It was about something bigger. Justice. Redemption. the chance to prove that right could triumph over might. "Maggie," he said softly, "I need to tell you something. These past 10 days being here with you and Clara, it's changed something in me. I came here looking for shelter from a storm, but I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." "What did you find?" He struggled to find the right words. "A reason, a purpose, something worth fighting for, someone worth fighting for." He paused, gathering his courage. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving Daniel, and you should. He was a good man who deserves to be remembered. But I want you to know that when this is over, when Frank is brought to justice and you and Clara are safe, I would be honored if you'd let me stay. Not as a hired hand or a temporary protector, but as someone who wants to build a life here. With you. With Clara." Maggie's breath caught. "Nathan, I don't know if I'm ready for that." "I know. And I'm not asking you to be ready now. I'm just asking you to know that I will be here, for as long as you need me. And if someday you decide you might want more than just protection, more than just help around the property, I'll be here for that too." She squeezed his hands tightly. "You're a good man, Nathan Cole. Better than you know." "I'm just a man trying to do right. Finally." They sat together until the fire burned low, talking about Daniel, about the life Maggie had built here, about Nathan's years of wandering. And slowly, carefully, they began to talk about what the future might hold if they could somehow emerge victorious from the battle ahead. The next morning, Nathan saddled Copper. The mare's leg had healed well enough for a slow ride. He told Maggie he was going to find Jacob Freeman first, since Pete had said Jacob lived closest. "Be careful," Maggie said, handing him a cloth bundle with food for the journey. "If Frank's men see you riding around asking questions, it could be dangerous." "I'll be careful. Lock the door after I leave. Don't open it for anyone but me or old Pete. I should be back by nightfall." Clara ran up and threw her arms around Nathan's legs. "You will come back, won't you, Mr. Nathan? You won't leave like Papa did." Nathan knelt and looked into the child's earnest face. "Clara, I promise you I will come back. Wild horses couldn't keep me away." The ride to Jacob Freeman's place took about 2 hours. Nathan found the shack exactly where Pete had said it would be, a rough structure built into the side of a hill, barely visible from the trail. Smoke rose from a crude chimney. Nathan dismounted and called out, "Mr. Freeman, my name is Nathan Cole. I'm a friend of Maggie Bennett. I'd like to talk with you about Daniel." The door opened slowly, and a tall black man emerged holding a rifle at the ready. Jacob Freeman had the build of someone who'd spent years doing hard physical labor with broad shoulders and calloused hands. His face was wary, his eyes taking in every detail of Nathan and his surroundings. "What do you want?" Jacob's voice was deep and cautious. "I want justice for Daniel Bennett, and I think you do too." Jacob's expression didn't change. "I'm just a man trying to live quiet. Don't want no trouble. I understand, but But Bennett and her daughter are in danger. The same man who killed Daniel is trying to drive them off their land. I'm trying to stop him, but I need help. I need people who knew Daniel who can testify to his character and what happened. Testify to who the sheriff won't listen to nothing I say. I'm a black man in Montana Territory. Might as well be invisible for all the law cares about me." Nathan stepped closer, keeping his movement slow and non-threatening. "You're right. One voice might be ignored, but multiple voices all telling the same truth backed up by evidence that's harder to ignore. That might be different." Jacob studied him for a long moment. "What evidence?" Nathan told him about the letter, the bottle, and Pete McCormick's testimony. As he spoke, he saw something change in Jacob's face. The wariness began to give way to something else. Anger and hope. "There's more," Jacob said quietly. "Something I never told nobody because I was too scared. But if you're building a real case, you should know." He gestured for Nathan to come inside. The interior of the shack was sparse but clean. Jacob poured 2 cups of bitter coffee and sat down heavily on a rough wooden bench. "I saw them," Jacob said. "Frank Dawson and another man, his name's Caleb Wright. I saw them at Daniel's well the night before he got sick. I was coming back late from hunting cutting through the woods near the Bennett property. I heard voices and hid, watched them pour something into the well from a dark bottle. I wanted to say something, wanted to warn Daniel, but I was scared. Frank Dawson's got power. He could have me arrested on any trumped-up charge, could have me hung. So I stayed quiet. His voice broke. And Daniel died because I was a coward. Nathan leaned forward. You weren't a coward. You were a man trying to survive in a system that's rigged against you. But now you have a chance to make it right. Will you testify to what you saw? If I testify, Frank will kill me. Not if we do this right. Not if we gather enough evidence that Frank has to face real justice, not the bought and paid for kind. Jacob was quiet for a long time, wrestling with himself. Finally, he nodded. Daniel Bennett gave me a chance when nobody else would. He saw me as a man, not just a color. I owe him. I'll testify. But we better make damn sure this works, because if it doesn't, we're all dead men. Nathan spent another hour with Jacob getting the full details of what he'd witnessed. Then he rode on to Riverside to find Samuel O'Brien. The mill town was larger than Hollow Creek, with several hundred residents and an air of prosperity that came from the lumber business. Nathan found Samuel working at the mill, operating a saw with practiced ease. Samuel O'Brien was a wiry Irishman in his late 30s with red hair and a face that had seen its share of hard living. When Nathan introduced himself and explained why he'd come, Samuel's initial reaction was suspicion. But at the mention of Daniel Bennett's name, his expression softened. "Daniel saved my life," Samuel said simply after Nathan had explained the situation. "Not figuratively, literally. I was drinking myself to death when he found me passed out in an alley in Billings. He could have walked past. Anyone else would have. But he picked me up, got me to a doctor, paid for my care. When I sobered up, he offered me a job, told me every man deserves a second chance no matter how far he's fallen. I've been sober 3 years now because of him. Then help me make sure his death wasn't in vain. Help me protect his family." Samuel didn't hesitate. "Whatever you need. I owe Daniel everything. Tell me what to do." By the time Nathan rode back to the cabin that evening, he had commitments from both Jacob and Samuel. Thomas Redwood was still to be found, but Pete McCormick had promised to track the man down. It was a start, a small coalition of people who had loved Daniel Bennett and were willing to stand up for his memory. When Nathan arrived at the cabin, he found Maggie and Clara waiting anxiously on the porch. Clara ran to him as he dismounted, and he scooped her up in his arms, feeling the rightness of it in a way that surprised him. "You came back," Clara exclaimed. "You kept your promise." "I always keep my promises, little one." That night, after Clara was asleep, Nathan and Maggie sat by the fire, and he told her everything. About Jacob's testimony, about Samuel's commitment to help, about the case they were slowly building. "It's not enough yet," he admitted. "We need more. We need something that connects Frank directly to the crime, something undeniable." Maggie was quiet, thinking. Then she said, "The well. Jacob said he saw them pour something into the well. What if we had the well water tested? If it still shows traces of poison after all this time, that would be physical evidence." Nathan nodded slowly. "That's smart, but where would we get it tested? And who would do it that Frank doesn't control?" "There's a doctor in Riverside Drive, Harrison. He's new to the area, came out from Philadelphia last year. He doesn't owe Frank anything. Maybe he could test a water sample, tell us what's in it." It was a good idea. Nathan made a mental note to ride to Riverside again in the next few days with a sample of well water. But before he could act on that plan, Frank Dawson made his next move. It came in the form of a letter delivered by a nervous young man who rode up to the cabin on the morning of the 14th day. The boy couldn't have been more than 16, and he looked terrified to be there. "I got a letter for Mrs. Bennett," he stammered, holding out a sealed envelope. "Mr. Dawson said I had to deliver it personal." Nathan took the letter. "You can go, and you can tell Mr. Dawson that his messages have been received." The boy practically fled, spurring his horse back down the trail at a gallop. Nathan opened the letter. It was written in a precise, educated hand that somehow made the words even more menacing. "Mrs. Bennett, you have until the end of this month to accept my generous offer for your property." The price is $500, which is more than fair for land that has brought you nothing but misery. If you refuse this offer, I will be forced to take legal action to claim what is rightfully mine through an old contract I have with your late husband. I would prefer to settle this in a civilized manner, but I am prepared to use whatever means necessary to secure this property. I strongly suggest you accept my offer and leave while you still can. You have 7 days to decide. Frank Dawson. Maggie's hands shook as she read the letter. He's lying. Daniel never signed any contract with Frank. This is a forgery. Of course it is. But if Frank has a corrupt judge in his pocket, he could make a forgery look legal enough to steal your land through the courts. Then what do we do? Nathan folded the letter carefully and put it in his pocket. We don't wait 7 days. We take the fight to him. Tomorrow I'm going to ride into Hollow Creek and confront Frank Dawson directly. I'm going to tell him that we know what he did, that we have evidence, and that we're going to see him brought to justice. Maggie grabbed his arm. Nathan, that's suicide. He'll have you killed. Not in broad daylight in front of witnesses. Frank Dawson's power comes from people's fear and from working in the shadows. If I confront him publicly, he'll have to respond publicly, and that might give us the opening we need. This is too dangerous. Please don't do this. Nathan took her hands gently. Maggie, I have to. If we keep reacting to his moves, we'll always be on the defensive. We need to seize the initiative, put him on his back foot. It's the only way. She searched his face, seeing the determination there. Finally, she nodded. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. If something goes wrong, Clara needs her mother. And Clara needs to see her mother fight for what's right, not cower in fear. I'm coming with you, Nathan. We do this together. Looking into her eyes, Nathan saw the same fierce determination he'd seen that first night when she'd opened the door with a broom handle in her hands. This was a woman who'd been beaten down, but never broken. And she was right. They were stronger together. All right, he said. Together. But we leave Clara with Pete McCormick. I'll ride over there first thing in the morning and ask him to watch her. That night Nathan couldn't sleep. He lay in the shed staring at the rough wooden ceiling, thinking about what lay ahead. He'd faced down men before, had even been in a few gunfights during his years on the range. But this was different. This wasn't about personal honor or a dispute over cattle. This was about taking on a man who had the whole territory in his grip, a man who'd already committed murder and would certainly do it again. And yet Nathan felt no real fear. What he felt was clarity. For the first time in his life since Thomas died, he had a purpose that went beyond mere survival. He was fighting for something that mattered, for justice, for a family that had become more important to him than his own life. He thought about Maggie, about the way she'd looked at him tonight when they'd agreed to face Frank together. There was something growing between them, something neither of them had quite put into words yet. It wasn't the wild passion of youth. It was something deeper and more enduring, respect, trust, the foundation of something that could become love given time. And Clara. God, that little girl had wrapped herself around his heart without him even noticing. The way she smiled when he came back from working, the way she asked endless questions about everything, the way she'd started calling him Mr. Nathan with such affection. He'd never thought of himself as father material, never imagined he could be someone a child looked up to. But Clara made him want to be better, stronger, more worthy of her trust. The next morning dawned cold and clear. Nathan rode to Pete McCormick's cabin and explained the situation. The old man agreed immediately to watch Clara for the day. "You be careful, son," Pete said as Nathan prepared to leave. "Frank Dawson's a snake, and snakes bite when they're cornered." "I know, but sometimes you have to corner the snake to kill it." Nathan and Maggie rode into Hollow Creek just before noon. The town was busy with midday activity, people going about their business, and Nathan was counting on that. He wanted witnesses, lots of them. Frank Dawson's blacksmith shop was at the center of town, a large building with a forge that glowed orange even from the street. Nathan and Maggie dismounted and tied their horses to the rail outside. "Stay close to me," Nathan murmured. "No matter what happens." They walked into the shop together. The heat from the forge hit them like a physical force. 4 men were working inside, hammering at various pieces of metal, and there, supervising from near the back, was Frank Dawson himself. He was a large man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of physical labor. His hair was steel gray, his face hard and weathered. When he saw Maggie and Nathan enter, his eyes narrowed. "Well," Frank said, his voice carrying easily over the sound of hammering, "the widow Bennett and her new friend. To what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Nathan stepped forward. "We're here to tell you that we know what you did, Dawson. We know you murdered Daniel Bennett, and we're going to prove it." The hammering stopped. Every man in the shop turned to stare. Frank's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "That's a serious accusation, friend. You better be able to back it up." "We have witnesses who saw you at the Bennett well the night before Daniel got sick. We have a letter Daniel wrote before he died naming you as a suspect. We have the bottle of poison, and we're going to make sure all of it gets into the hands of someone who can't be bought." Frank was silent for a moment. Then he smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "I see. Well, let me tell you something, Cole. Is that your name, Cole? Let me tell you how things work out here. I own this town. I own the sheriff. I own the judge. I own half the businesses and most of the land. If you think you can waltz in here with some conspiracy theory and take me down, you're even dumber than you look." He stepped closer, his massive frame imposing. "You're a drifter, Cole. Nobody. You've got no standing here, no authority, no power. And Mrs. Bennett, well, everyone knows she went a little mad after her husband died, started seeing plots and conspiracies everywhere. Isn't that right, gentlemen?" The workers in the shop nodded nervously, clearly too intimidated to disagree. "Here's what's going to happen," Frank continued. "You're going to turn around and walk out of here. Mrs. Bennett is going to accept my very generous offer for her property, and you, Cole, are going to ride out of this territory and never come back. Because if you don't, well, accidents happen. Men disappear in this wild country all the time." "Understood." Nathan held his ground. "I understand that you're scared, Dawson. Scared because for the first time someone's standing up to you. Scared because your reign of terror might actually be coming to an end." Frank's face darkened with rage. "Get them out of here," he barked to his workers. "If they're not gone in 10 seconds, throw them out." The 4 workers moved forward reluctantly. Nathan's hand went to his gun, but before things could escalate further, a voice called from the doorway. "That won't be necessary." Everyone turned. Sheriff Tom Bradford stood in the entrance, his hand resting on his own gun. He was a man in his early 40s with thinning hair and a face that showed the strain of too many compromises. "Sheriff," Frank said smoothly. "Perfect timing. These people are making false accusations and disturbing my business. I want them arrested." Bradford looked at Nathan and Maggie, then at Frank. Something complicated passed over his face. "On what charge?" "Slander, harassment. Take your pick." "Mr. Cole, Mrs. Bennett," Bradford said quietly. "I need you to come with me. We'll discuss this at my office." Nathan hesitated. Was the sheriff going to arrest them, or was he offering them a way to de-escalate before violence broke out? "All right, Sheriff," Nathan said finally. "We'll come peacefully." As they walked toward the door, Frank called after them. 7 days, Mrs. Bennett. The clock is ticking." At the sheriff's office, Bradford closed the door and turned to face them. His expression was troubled. "That was foolish," he said, "confronting Frank like that in his own place. You're lucky I happened to be walking by." "Lucky?" Maggie's voice was sharp. "Or were you following us?" Bradford didn't answer directly. "Look, I know what you think of me. You think I'm in Frank's pocket, and you're not entirely wrong. Frank Dawson has helped my family when we needed it. My wife's sick, has been for 2 years. The medicine she needs costs more than I make in 6 months. Frank's been paying for it." "So you let him get away with murder," Nathan said flatly. Bradford flinched. "I didn't let him do anything. I investigated Daniel Bennett's death. There was no evidence of foul play, just fever, same as the doctor said." "Because you didn't want to find evidence, because looking too close might have meant losing that money for your wife's medicine." The sheriff's face crumpled. You think I don't know that? You think I sleep well at night? But what was I supposed to do? Let my wife die to pursue a case that might not even be real? Nathan's voice softened slightly. The case is real. Sheriff, we have evidence, real evidence, witnesses, physical proof, everything you'd need to bring charges against Frank Dawson. Bradford shook his head. Even if you do, it won't matter. Frank owns Judge Carter. Any case you bring will be thrown out. Then we go over Carter's head. We bring in a federal marshal. The nearest marshal's office is 300 miles away. You think Frank's going to sit quietly while you ride to Helena and back? He'll have you killed within a day of leaving. Maggie stepped forward. So what are you saying, Sheriff, that we should just give up? Let Frank steal my land and get away with murdering my husband? Bradford looked at her with genuine anguish in his eyes. I'm saying you should take his offer and leave. Take the money, start over somewhere else. It's the only way you and your daughter survive this. No, Maggie said firmly. I won't run. This is my home. Daniel built it with his own hands, and I'll be damned if I let his killer drive me away from it. Nathan put a hand on her shoulder, then addressed the sheriff. What if we could get you the evidence and the witnesses? What if we could make the case so airtight that even Frank's money couldn't make it go away? Would you do your duty then? Bradford was silent for a long time. Finally, he said, if you can really prove Frank killed Daniel Bennett, if you can build a case that would stand up in any court, not just our compromised local one, then yes, I'll do my duty. I'll arrest Frank Dawson myself. But you better be absolutely certain, because if you fail, Frank will make sure none of us see another sunrise. It wasn't the ringing endorsement Nathan had hoped for, but it was something. A crack in Frank's armor. The sheriff wasn't completely lost. Give us time, Nathan said. We'll bring you proof. Real, undeniable proof. As they left the sheriff's office, Maggie turned to Nathan. Do you think he meant it? About arresting Frank if we have enough evidence? I think he wants to believe he's still a good man, that he can redeem himself. Whether he actually has the courage to follow through, we'll find out. They rode back to Pete's cabin to collect Clara. The little girl ran to them with obvious relief, and Nathan scooped her up, holding her tight. On the ride home, Clara chattered about her day with Pete, who'd taught her how to identify animal tracks. But Nathan's mind was elsewhere, already planning the next moves. They needed to get that water sample tested. They needed to find Thomas Redwood and add his testimony to Jacobs and Samuels. They needed to build a case so strong that even a corrupt system couldn't ignore it. That evening, as the sun set over the Montana plains, Nathan stood outside the cabin looking at the land Daniel Bennett had died defending. It was good land with good water and solid timber. But more than that, it represented something important. The right of ordinary people to hold on to what was theirs against the predations of the powerful. Maggie came out and stood beside him, her presence warm and comforting. Thank you, she said softly, for standing with us, for fighting for us. Nathan turned to look at her, seeing the way the fading light caught in her hair, the strength and beauty in her face, despite the hardships she'd endured. I'm not just fighting for you anymore, he admitted. I'm fighting for us, for the future I hope we might have together. Maggie's breath caught. Nathan, I need to tell you something. These past 2 weeks having you here, it's changed things for me. I still love Daniel. I always will. But I'm beginning to believe that maybe there's room in my heart for someone else too. That maybe Daniel would want me to be happy, not spend the rest of my life mourning. He would, Nathan said with certainty. Any man who truly loved you would want you to live, not just survive. She reached out and took his hand. When this is over, when Frank is dealt with and Clara is safe, ask me again. About staying. About building a life together. And I think my answer might surprise you. I'll hold you to that. They stood together as night fell. The Montana sky, turning deep purple, shot through with streaks of gold. In the distance, a coyote called out, and Copper answered with a soft whinny from the shed. Nathan turned to face Maggie, fully taking both her hands in his. The firelight from inside the cabin cast a warm glow through the window, illuminating her face. He could see hope there, mixed with fear, mixed with something else he dared not name yet. "Maggie," he said softly. "May I?" He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Maggie understood. She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until they were nearly touching. "Yes," she whispered. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as though they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then Maggie's hands moved to Nathan's shoulders, and his arms circled her waist, and the kiss deepened into something that spoke of loneliness, ending of two broken people finding wholeness in each other. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Maggie rested her forehead against Nathan's chest. "I didn't think I could feel this way again," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Didn't think I deserved to." Nathan tilted her chin up gently. "You deserve everything good this world has to offer, and I'm going to spend every day trying to give it to you." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it. The first kiss of their new beginning. They stood together as night fell, two people who'd found each other by accident but were choosing each other by design. Whatever came next, whether victory or defeat, they would face it together. And that made all the difference. The 17th day dawned with an unnatural stillness, the kind of quiet that settles over the land before a storm breaks. Nathan woke in the shed to find Copper already alert, her ears pricked forward, sensing something amiss. He pulled on his boots and stepped outside into the pre-dawn gray, his breath misting in the cold air. That's when he saw them. Riders on the ridge to the east, silhouetted against the lightening sky. 5 of them sitting motionless on their horses watching the cabin. They made no attempt to hide their presence. This was a message, a promise of what was coming. Nathan counted 7 days since they'd confronted Frank Dawson. The deadline in the letter was tonight at midnight. Frank was making his final play. He walked quickly to the cabin and knocked softly. Maggie opened the door immediately, already dressed, her face pale but composed. She'd seen the riders too. "It's time," she said simply. "Yes, but we're ready. Are you still willing to go through with this?" She nodded firmly. "Clara's already awake. I told her we might need to use the root cellar today, that it was like a game. She's scared, but she's being brave." Nathan felt his chest tighten at the thought of that little girl having to hide in darkness while the adults fought battles above her head. But there was no other choice now. "Good. I'm going to ride to Pete's place and gather everyone. Jacob and Samuel should already be there. If we're lucky, Pete found Thomas Redwood too. We'll need every gun we can get." Maggie grabbed his arm. "Be careful. Those men on the ridge, they'll follow you." "I'm counting on it. The longer I keep them occupied, the more time you have to get Clara to safety." He saddled Copper quickly and rode out deliberately, taking the trail that would lead him past the watching riders. As he'd predicted, 3 of them peeled off to follow him, keeping their distance but making their intentions clear. They wanted him to know he was being watched, wanted him to feel hunted. Nathan let them follow for about a mile, then suddenly spurred Copper into a gallop. The mare responded beautifully, her heeled leg showing no sign of weakness as she stretched out into a full run. The terrain here was rough, covered with rocks and fallen timber that Nathan had spent the past weeks learning intimately. He knew every gully, every deadfall, every place where a horse could run and where it couldn't. His pursuers tried to keep up, but their horses weren't as sure-footed on this ground. Nathan led them on a winding chase through the forest, then doubled back on a game trail they'd passed circling around until he was behind them. By the time they realized they'd lost him, Nathan was already approaching Pete McCormick's cabin from the opposite direction. Pete's place was a hive of activity. The old man was there along with Jacob Freeman and Samuel O'Brien, and to Nathan's profound relief, a third man he didn't recognize stood with them, a lean figure with the weathered face of someone who lived most of his life outdoors. "Thomas Redwood, I presume," Nathan said, dismounting. The man nodded. "Pete found me 2 days ago, told me what was happening. I owe Daniel Bennett my life. I'm here to help settle the score." Nathan quickly explained the situation, the riders watching the cabin, the deadline tonight, the confrontation that was surely coming. "Frank's not going to wait," Nathan concluded. He's going to make his move today, probably before nightfall. He'll come with enough men to overwhelm us, burn us out if he has to. Our only chance is to be ready to make the cost so high that he has to back down. Or we could take the fight to him, Jacob suggested. Hit him before he hits us. Nathan shook his head. No, we need him to be the aggressor. We need witnesses to see that he's the one attacking a widow and her child. That's what will turn public opinion, what will make it impossible for even a corrupt sheriff to ignore. Pete scratched his grizzled chin. So we ford up at the cabin and wait for them to come? Not exactly. We're going to set a trap, and we're going to use myself as bait. Over the next hour, Nathan laid out his plan. It was risky, dependent on timing and luck, but it was the best chance they had. The men listened carefully, asked questions, made suggestions. By the time the sun was fully up, they had refined the strategy into something that just might work. They rode back to the cabin together, taking a route that kept them hidden from the watchers on the ridge. Maggie had Clara ready the child's small bag packed with essentials. Her eyes were wide with fear, but she was trying to be brave. Nathan knelt beside her. Clara, do you remember what I told you about how cowboys get scared but don't let fear stop them? She nodded, her lower lip trembling. Today you get to be like a cowboy. You're going to go with Pete to his cabin, and you're going to stay there until we come get you. Can you do that? Will Mama be okay? Clara's voice was small and frightened. I'm going to make sure your Mama is safe. That's a promise, and you know I keep my promises. Clara threw her arms around his neck, holding tight. I love you, Mr. Nathan. The words hit him like a physical blow, filling something inside him he hadn't known was empty. He hugged her back, fierce and gentle at the same time. I love you too, little one. Now go with Pete. Be brave. After Clara and Pete left by a hidden trail through the woods, the remaining 5 people set about preparing the cabin for what was coming. Jacob and Thomas worked on reinforcing the shutters and doors. Samuel checked and rechecked their limited ammunition. Maggie filled every container they had with water in case of fire. And Nathan walked the perimeter one more time, making sure the traps he'd set over the past weeks were ready. Deadfalls that could be triggered to block the main approaches. Tripwires that would warn of anyone trying to approach from the woods. It wasn't much, but it might make the difference between survival and death. Around 2 in the afternoon, the riders on the ridge were joined by others. Nathan counted 15 men total now, all armed, all watching. Frank Dawson was among them, sitting on a large black horse, clearly directing operations. He's going to come soon, Jacob said, standing beside Nathan and looking at the gathering force. Before the sun gets too low, he'll want good light for what he's planning. Then we need to be ready, everyone to positions. They'd divided the cabin into defensive zones. Jacob and Thomas would cover the front where the main attack would likely come. Samuel would watch the east side. Maggie, despite Nathan's protests, insisted on covering the west side with Daniel's old rifle. And Nathan would remain mobile, moving wherever the threat was greatest. The attack came at 3 o'clock. Frank Dawson himself rode forward, staying just out of rifle range, and called out in a voice that carried clearly across the open ground. Nathan Cole, Margaret Bennett. This is your last chance. Surrender the property deed, and I'll let you live. Refuse, and you'll burn along with that cabin. Nathan stepped out onto the porch, his Colt prominently displayed but holstered. He wanted Frank to see him, to focus on him. The property isn't yours, Dawson. It never was and never will be. Daniel Bennett built this place, and his widow and daughter have every right to stay here. Daniel Bennett was a criminal who consorted with other criminals. His land is forfeit. Daniel Bennett was a better man than you'll ever be. He gave people second chances. You just take what you want through murder and intimidation. Frank's face, even at this distance, visibly darkened with rage. So be it. You've made your choice. He raised his arm and brought it down sharply. The 15 riders charged. Nathan dove back inside the cabin as the first bullet smashed into the wooden walls. The sound was deafening, a rolling thunder of gunfire that seemed to come from all directions at once. But the cabin Daniel had built was solid, the logs thick and strong. The bullets thudded into the wood but didn't penetrate. Jacob fired through the front window, his shot carefully aimed. One of the charging riders jerked and fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Thomas fired next, and another horse screamed and went down, throwing its rider. The charge faltered as the attackers realized they were facing prepared resistance, not helpless victims. Several riders broke off, circling around to try the sides and back of the cabin. That's when they hit Nathan's traps. The first tripwire caught a horse's leg, sending it crashing down. The rider flew over the horse's head and lay still. Another rider trying to approach through the trees on the east side triggered a deadfall that sent a heavy log swinging down from where it had been suspended. It caught him in the chest and knocked him from his saddle with a sickening crunch. Samuel's rifle barked from the east window, and another attacker fell back with a cry of pain. But there were too many of them. Even as Nathan and his allies fought back, the sheer weight of numbers was beginning to tell. Bullets continued to slam into the cabin from multiple directions. One shattered a window, showering glass across the floor. Another punched through a shutter, splintering wood. Nathan moved to the west side where Maggie was positioned. She was firing Daniel's rifle with grim determination, working the bolt action with practiced ease, but her face was pale and streaked with tears. "We can't hold much longer," she shouted over the gunfire. "We don't have to hold, we just have to last long enough." Long enough for what? Before Nathan could answer, he heard it, a sound he'd been praying for. Hoofbeats approaching from the south, from the direction of Hollow Creek. A lot of them. He risked a look out the window and saw them coming. 20 riders moving fast, and at their head was Sheriff Tom Bradford. Behind the sheriff rode townspeople Nathan recognized from his visit to Hollow Creek, men who'd been working in shops and on farms, men who'd apparently decided that enough was enough. And riding with them, miraculously, was Reverend Samuel Hayes, the old preacher from Riverside that Pete had mentioned, his white hair streaming behind him as he rode. Frank Dawson saw them too. He called out an order, and his men stopped shooting, turned to face this new threat. For a moment, there was an eerie silence broken only by the groans of wounded men and the nervous stamping of horses. Sheriff Bradford rode forward until he was between the two groups, his hand raised. "Frank Dawson." The sheriff's voice rang out clear and strong, stronger than Nathan had ever heard it. "You are under arrest for the murder of Daniel Bennett, for attempted murder, for arson, and for leading an armed assault on a lawful resident of this territory." Frank's face was twisted with fury and disbelief. "You can't arrest me, Bradford. I own you. I pay for your wife's medicine." "Not anymore." Bradford's voice cracked like a whip. "My wife died 3 days ago, Frank. That medicine you were paying for, it stopped working months ago. She was dying anyway, and I let you use her suffering to control me. I let you turn me into a coward and a criminal. But she's at peace now, and I'm done being your puppet." The sheriff's words hit Frank like physical blows. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. Bradford continued, his voice rising. "I have testimony from multiple witnesses who saw you poison Daniel Bennett's well. I have a letter Daniel wrote before he died naming you as his killer. I have physical evidence of poison, and I have 20 armed citizens who've had enough of your reign of terror in this territory." "They're lying!" Frank screamed. "All of them. They're criminals and conspiracy theorists." "Then you can make your case at trial." Bradford drew his gun. "Throw down your weapons. All of you. Anyone who fires another shot will be charged with attempted murder of a peace officer." Frank's men looked at each other uncertainly. They'd signed on for an easy job terrorizing a widow, not for a gunfight with the law and half the town. One by one they began lowering their weapons. But Frank Dawson wasn't done. With a roar of pure rage, he spurred his horse directly at the cabin, his gun drawn, his face contorted with hatred. "If I can't have this land, nobody will—" Nathan saw him coming and knew instantly what Frank intended. The man was going to try to burn the cabin, would probably die in the attempt, but would take Maggie with him out of pure spite. Nathan burst out of the cabin door, his Colt already in his hand. "Dawson!" Frank turned in his saddle, bringing his gun to bear. Both men fired at almost the same instant. Frank's bullet whined past Nathan's ear so close he felt the wind of its passage. Nathan's bullet took Frank in the shoulder, spinning him around in his saddle. The big man slumped but didn't fall, his hand still clutching his gun. Before either could fire again, Sheriff Bradford was there riding between them, his own gun pointed at Frank. "Drop it, Frank. It's over." For a long moment, Frank Dawson sat, frozen blood spreading across his shirt, his face a mask of pain and rage and defeat. Then slowly his gun hand opened and the weapon fell to the ground. "It's not over," Frank gasped. "I have lawyers. I have judges. I have money. You'll never make this stick, Bradford." "Maybe not in our local court," a new voice spoke up. Reverend Hayes rode forward, and beside him was a man Nathan hadn't noticed before, a lean figure wearing a marshal's badge. "But you'll be tried in federal court, Mr. Dawson, and I don't think your influence reaches that far." The marshal's name was Henry Thompson, and he'd been in Riverside investigating reports of land fraud when Reverend Hayes found him and told him about the situation at the Bennett cabin. The old preacher had ridden through the night to bring federal law to bear on Frank Dawson's crimes. As Thompson's deputies moved in to arrest Frank and his men, Nathan felt his legs go weak with relief. It was over. Actually over. Not just this battle, but the whole war. Maggie emerged from the cabin and walked straight to Nathan, not running, just walking with quiet dignity. When she reached him, she simply put her arms around him and held on tight. No words were necessary. They'd survived. Together. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The wounded were tended to. Statements were taken. Frank Dawson, his shoulder bandaged, was placed in irons and loaded into a wagon for the journey to the territorial prison to await trial. As the wagon pulled away, Frank looked back at Nathan with pure hatred in his eyes. "This isn't over, Cole. You haven't won." Nathan met his gaze steadily. "Yes, I have. I've won everything that matters." Sheriff Bradford approached Nathan as the sun began to set, his face haggard but somehow lighter than it had been. "I owe you an apology," Bradford said quietly. "I should have investigated Daniel's death properly. If I had, maybe all of this could have been avoided." "You did the right thing in the end," Nathan replied. "That's what counts. My wife, she knew what I was doing, letting Frank control me. In her last days she begged me to stand up to him, to be the man she married. I told her I would, but I didn't think I'd have the courage. Today I found it. Too late for her to see, but maybe not too late to matter." Nathan put a hand on the sheriff's shoulder. "It matters. To everyone in this territory. You gave them back their freedom." After everyone else had left, after the sun had set and the stars had come out, Pete McCormick arrived with Clara. The little girl saw her mother and Nathan standing together and ran to them with a cry of joy. "Mama! Mr. Nathan! You're safe!" Nathan scooped her up in his arms, holding her close, feeling Maggie's hand on his back. They stood together like that, a family in all but name, as the Montana night settled around them. The trial of Frank Dawson took place 6 weeks later in Helena, the territorial capital. Nathan, Maggie, Jacob Samuel Thomas, and Sheriff Bradford all traveled there to testify. The evidence was overwhelming. Jacob's eyewitness account of seeing Frank poison the well, the letter Daniel had written, the bottle of arsenic Maggie had found, the testimony of townspeople who'd been intimidated and defrauded by Frank's schemes. The defense lawyers fought hard, tried every trick they knew, but in the end, the truth was too powerful to be denied. Frank Dawson was found guilty of murder in the 1st degree and sentenced to life in prison. When the verdict was read, Maggie wept. Not tears of joy exactly, but tears of release of a burden finally lifted. Nathan held her hand through it, all his own emotions too complex to name. After the trial, Reverend Hayes approached them. The old preacher had attended every day of the proceedings, offering quiet support. "I'd like to offer you both something," Hayes said. "When you're ready, of course. I'd be honored to perform a wedding ceremony. That is, if you're of a mind to make your partnership official." Nathan and Maggie looked at each other. They'd talked about this in quiet moments over the past weeks, about what the future might hold, about whether what they felt for each other was real or just the bond forged by shared danger. "We're of a mind," Maggie said softly, "but we'd like to wait until spring, give ourselves time to be sure, and give Clara time to adjust to the idea of having a new father." Nathan nodded his agreement, though part of him wanted to marry Maggie right then and there. But she was right. This was too important to rush. They returned to the cabin in early March. The snow was beginning to melt, and the first green shoots were pushing up through the frozen ground. Nathan had spent the weeks of the trial working with Jacob, Samuel, and Thomas to make plans for the future. The four men had decided to pool their resources and create something new on the land surrounding the Bennett cabin. They called it Settlement Cole, a small community built on the principles Daniel Bennett had lived by. A place where people who'd been cast out by society could find a second chance. Former prisoners, yes, but also widows, orphans, anyone who needed a fresh start. Jacob would build houses. Samuel would run a sawmill. Thomas would guide hunting and trapping expeditions. And Nathan would be the heart of it all, the steady presence that held everything together. But before any of that could begin, there was something Nathan needed to do. On a warm evening in late April, with the Montana plains coming alive with spring, Nathan asked Maggie to walk with him down to the creek behind the cabin. Clara stayed behind with Pete, who'd become a permanent fixture around the settlement, serving as grandfather figure to Clara and advisor to the men. At the creek, in the exact spot where Reverend Hayes had told them Daniel proposed to Maggie 10 years before, Nathan took both of Maggie's hands in his. "I've been thinking about what to say," he began. "I've composed speeches in my head, practiced words. But the truth is simpler than all that. Maggie, you gave me something I'd lost a long time ago. You gave me hope. You showed me that a man's past doesn't have to define his future, that it's never too late to become the person you're meant to be." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I know I'm not Daniel. I'll never try to be. He was a good man who deserves to be remembered and honored. But I promise you this. I will love you and Clara with everything I have. I will build a life with you that honors Daniel's memory by living the values he believed in. I will be the father Clara deserves, not replacing the one she lost, but adding to the love she already has." He pulled out a simple silver ring, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's. The only thing they found with me when I was left at the orphanage. I've carried it all my life as a reminder of where I came from. But now I want it to be a symbol of where I'm going. Margaret Bennett, will you marry me?" Maggie's eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. "Yes, Nathan Cole, 1,000 times yes." They kissed there by the creek as the sun set and the first stars appeared, and it felt like a promise fulfilled, a circle completed. The wedding took place in May, a simple ceremony attended by everyone in Settlement Cole and many folks from the surrounding towns. Clara served as flower girl, scattering wild spring blossoms along the path to where Reverend Hayes stood waiting. When it came time for the vows, Nathan spoke words he'd written himself, words that came from the deepest part of his heart. "Maggie, I spent my whole life searching for something I couldn't name. Riding from town to town, ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to put down roots. I thought I was happy. I thought freedom meant having no ties, no responsibilities, no one waiting for me at the end of the day. I was wrong. Freedom isn't about being alone. Freedom is finding the people worth staying for. And I've found them. I've found you." Maggie's vows were equally moving. "Nathan, you came to us in a storm, a stranger who owed us nothing. You could have left after one night, after 1 week. But you chose to stay. You chose to fight for us, to stand with us against impossible odds. You showed me that love doesn't die when someone passes. It transforms. It grows in new directions. Daniel will always be in my heart. But there's room for you, too. There's room for the future we're going to build together." Reverend Hayes then did something unexpected. He called Clara forward to stand between her mother and Nathan. "Clara Bennett," Hayes said gently, "do you accept Nathan Cole as your father?" Clara, who'd been coached on this moment, spoke clearly and proudly. "I do." "And Nathan Cole, do you promise to love Clara as your own daughter, to guide her, protect her, and help her grow into the woman she's meant to become?" Nathan knelt down so he was eye level with Clara. His voice was thick with emotion. "I do." "Clara, from this day forward, you are my daughter. Not just in my heart, but in every way that matters. I will always be here for you. That's a promise." Clara threw her arms around his neck. "I love you, Papa Nathan." The word Papa nearly broke him. Nathan hugged Clara tight, then stood with her hand in one of his and Maggie's in the other as Reverend Hayes pronounced them a family. The celebration that followed was joyous. There was music and dancing, food and laughter. The people of Settlement Cole had contributed what they could, and the result was a feast that would be remembered for years. As the party wound down and the guests began to depart, Nathan found himself standing with Sheriff Bradford, watching the sun set over the plains. "You did good, Cole," Bradford said quietly. "Real good. This place what you're building here, it's something special. Daniel would have been proud." "I hope so. That's all I'm trying to do. Build something he'd be proud of." Bradford was quiet for a moment. "I'm leaving Hollow Creek, resigned as sheriff. Too many ghosts there, too many regrets. I'm thinking of heading back east, maybe find work where nobody knows my history. Start fresh." "Sometimes starting fresh is the right choice," Nathan agreed. "Sometimes it's running away. You have to decide which one it is for you. I think it's a bit of both, but maybe that's okay." Bradford extended his hand. "Thank you, Nathan, for giving me a chance to do the right thing, even if it came late." Nathan shook his hand firmly. "It's never too late to do right. Remember that." 1 year later, Settlement Cole had grown to 15 families. Jacob had built 6 new houses with more in the works. Samuel's sawmill was operating at full capacity, providing lumber not just for their own community, but for towns throughout the region. Thomas had organized a cooperative hunting operation that ensured everyone had meat through the winter. And Nathan had become something he'd never imagined. He could be a leader, a father figure to the whole community. People came to him with disputes to settle, with advice to seek, with problems to solve. He handled each situation with the same steady patience, the same commitment to fairness that Daniel Bennett had shown. The cabin itself had been expanded significantly. Nathan had added 2 bedrooms, a larger kitchen, and a wide front porch where he and Maggie often sat in the evenings watching Clara play with the other children or helping her with her lessons. Clara was 8 now, thriving in ways that seemed miraculous given the trauma of her early years. She still remembered her first father, still visited his grave regularly with flowers. But she called Nathan Papa, without hesitation climbed into his lap for stories, sought his approval and comfort in equal measure. And Maggie bloomed like a flower finally given enough sun and water. The hard lines of fear and deprivation had softened from her face. She smiled easily, now laughed often. She'd become the heart of Settlement Cole, the one who organized community meals, who visited the sick, who welcomed newcomers with genuine warmth. She was also 7 months pregnant with Nathan's child. The pregnancy had been a surprise, coming so quickly after the wedding. Maggie was 30 now, and she'd worried about complications, but Dr. Harrison from Riverside checked on her regularly and declared both mother and child healthy and strong. Nathan was simultaneously terrified and thrilled at the prospect of becoming a father to a baby. He'd gotten comfortable with Clara at age 7, old enough to talk and reason with. The idea of a helpless infant depending on him was daunting. But every time he felt doubt creeping in, he'd remember his promise. He'd promised to build a family, to create something lasting. And he kept his promises. On a warm June evening, with the Montana sky painted gold and crimson by the setting sun, Nathan sat on the porch with Maggie and Clara. Clara was reading aloud from a book Reverend Hayes had sent her, her voice clear and confident. Maggie sat in the rocking chair Nathan had made for her, her hands resting on her swollen belly. Nathan watched them. These 2 people who'd become his entire world, and felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. Clara finished her chapter and looked up. "Papa Nathan, tomorrow is the anniversary, 1 year since you came here." "I know, sweetheart. Mama says you saved us. Is that true?" Nathan considered the question carefully. "I think we saved each other. You and your mama gave me a reason to stop running. I helped you stand up to someone who wanted to hurt you. But the real saving, that was all of us together." "Tell me again about the first night," Clara said, as she often did. She loved hearing the story, hearing how a cowboy with an injured horse had stumbled into their lives and changed everything. So Nathan told the story once more, with Maggie occasionally adding details he forgot. They talked about the broom handle Maggie had held like a weapon, about the blanket Clara had brought for Copper, about the thin potato soup they'd shared. They talked about the fear and the hope, the danger and the courage. As the story wound to its conclusion, Maggie reached over and took Nathan's hand. "You know what I think about sometimes," she said softly. "I think about how close we came to losing everything. If you'd chosen differently that night, if you'd left Copper and kept going, we would have died that winter. Clara and I would be gone, and Frank Dawson would own this land. Everything we have now, all of this, it all hinged on one decision you made in a snowstorm." Nathan squeezed her hand gently. "I made that decision a long time ago over Thomas's grave. The snowstorm just gave me a chance to keep the promise I'd already made, and I'm grateful for it every single day. Are you happy, Nathan, truly happy?" He looked at her, at Clara, at the community they'd built spreading out around them. He thought about the baby growing inside Maggie, about the life they'd created from the ashes of tragedy. "I'm happier than I ever imagined I could be. I spent 32 years convinced I wasn't meant for this kind of life, that I was meant to be alone. But I was wrong. This is exactly what I was meant for. This is home." That night, after Clara was asleep, Nathan and Maggie stood together on the porch, looking up at the vast Montana sky blazing with stars. In the distance, they could hear laughter from one of the other cabins, the sound of the community coming to life around them. "Do you ever think about Daniel?" Nathan asked quietly. It was a question he'd never quite had the courage to ask before. "Every day," Maggie replied without hesitation, "but not with pain anymore. Now when I think of him, I remember the good times. I remember the man he was and the values he taught me. And I'm grateful that he built this cabin, that he stood up for what was right, that he made choices that eventually led me to you." "Do you think he'd approve of us?" Maggie smiled. "I know he would. Daniel believed in second chances and new beginnings. He'd be happy that his daughter has a father who loves her, that his wife has a partner who stands beside her, that his land is being used to help people who need it. This is his legacy, Nathan. Not just the cabin or the property, but the principles. And you're honoring those principles every day." Nathan pulled her close, careful of her pregnant belly. "Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter with an injured horse. Thank you for being the kind of man worth taking a chance on." They stood together in the darkness, two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, who'd fought for each other, bled for each other, and built something beautiful from the ruins of tragedy. The cabin that the world had once called cursed now glowed with warmth and light. The land that Frank Dawson had tried to steal was now home to dozens of people who'd been given second chances, and the man who'd spent most of his life running had finally found a place to stand. Nathan thought about the journey that had brought him here, all those years of wandering, all those nights spent alone under the stars, wondering what his life was for. He'd been searching for something without even knowing what it was. Purpose, family, a reason to wake up each morning beyond mere survival. He'd found it all here in this cabin with this woman, with this child, and with the child yet to come. "Nathan," Maggie said softly, "the baby's kicking. Want to feel?" He placed his hand on her belly and felt the strong movements beneath his palm. His child, his son or daughter, a life he'd helped create, a future he'd helped build. "Strong," he murmured, "just like the mother. Just like the father, too." Clara appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. "I had a dream," she said sleepily. "Papa Daniel was in it. He said to tell you both that he's proud of us. All of us. Is that silly?" Nathan knelt down and gathered Clara into his arms. "No, sweetheart, that's not silly at all. I believe he is proud. And I promise you we'll keep making him proud. We'll build a life here that honors his memory by being good people, by helping others, by standing up for what's right." "I promise too," Clara said seriously. Then she smiled. "And our family's getting bigger. Soon I'll have a baby brother or sister to help take care of—" "That's right, and you'll be the best big sister anyone could ask for." They went inside together, all three of them, and Nathan tucked Clara back into bed. As he pulled the covers up around her, she looked at him with those wise eyes that sometimes seemed far too old for her 8 years. "Papa Nathan, are we safe now? Really safe? The bad men won't come back?" "We're safe, sweetheart. Frank Dawson is in prison where he belongs. Sheriff Bradford did the right thing in the end, and we have friends all around us now, good people who'll stand with us if there's ever trouble again. You don't have to be afraid anymore." "I'm not afraid when you're here. You keep your promises." Those simple words spoken with such complete trust nearly undid him. He kissed her forehead. "Always, Clara. I'll always keep my promises to you." After she drifted back to sleep, Nathan returned to the porch where Maggie was waiting. They sat in the rocking chairs he'd built, holding hands, listening to the night sounds of their growing community. "Tell me something," Maggie said. "If you could go back to that night in the snowstorm, knowing everything that would happen, all the danger and fear and pain, would you still make the same choice? Would you still stay?" Nathan didn't hesitate. Every single time, without question, because all that danger and fear and pain led to this, to you, to Clara, to our child, to home, and that makes everything worth it. Even losing the money for your land, your dream of having your own ranch. Nathan laughed softly. "I got my ranch. It's just bigger than I planned, with more family than I imagined. This is better than anything I could have dreamed up on my own." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Maggie said, "The other day, Mrs. Freeman was asking me about our story. She wanted to know how we fell in love. And I realized I couldn't point to one moment. It wasn't love at first sight. It was something that grew slowly like a seed pushing up through hard ground. Each day you stayed, each time you kept your word, each moment you showed kindness to Clara, it grew a little more." "I know exactly when I knew," Nathan said. "It was the night Clara brought that blanket out to the shed for Copper. I watched her do this small act of kindness for a suffering animal, and I saw you in her, saw the goodness you'd taught her despite all the hardship you'd both endured. And I thought, I want to be part of this. I want to help protect this goodness. That's when I knew I was going to stay no matter what it cost. And now here we are. Here we are." As midnight approached, marking exactly 1 year since Nathan had first knocked on the cabin door, he stood and helped Maggie to her feet. They walked to the front of the porch and looked out at Settlement Cole, at the scattered lights from other cabins, at the life they'd built from nothing. "1 year," Maggie whispered. "1 year ago I was convinced my life was over, that all I had left was survival day by day until Clara was grown. I couldn't imagine being happy again, couldn't imagine trusting anyone. Couldn't imagine loving anyone but Daniel. And now—" She turned to face him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "Now I have everything. A husband who honors my past while building my future. A daughter who's thriving. A community of people who care for each other. A baby on the way. Hope for tomorrow instead of fear. You gave me all of that, Nathan." "We gave it to each other," he corrected gently. "You taught me that a man's worth isn't measured in miles traveled or money earned, but in promises kept and love given. You showed me what it means to stand firm for something that matters. You made me want to be better than I was." They kissed a kiss that tasted of promise and gratitude and the kind of deep, abiding love that comes from truly seeing another person and choosing them anyway, choosing them because of who they are not, despite it. When they finally pulled apart, Maggie rested her head on Nathan's shoulder. "Tell me what you see when you look ahead. 5 years from now, 10 years. What do you see?" Nathan thought about it, really considered the question. "I see Clara grown into a strong young woman, maybe teaching at the school we're going to build. I see our baby, our son or daughter, running through these same fields that Clara plays in now. I see Settlement Cole grown into a real town with a church and a school and people living good lives. I see us, you and me, growing old together on this porch watching our grandchildren play. I see a life well lived, surrounded by people we love, doing work that matters. That's a beautiful vision. What do you see?" "The same thing, exactly the same thing, and I see Daniel's memory honored in all of it. not forgotten, but woven into the fabric of this place. His kindness, his belief in second chances, his courage to stand up for what's right. Those values are the foundation of everything we're building here. Nathan nodded. We should make sure Clara knows that this place Settlement Cole, it's named for me, but it's really Daniel's legacy. His dream of a place where everyone gets a fair chance. She knows. And when the new baby is old enough, we'll make sure they know too. The story of their big sister's first father, the hero who built this cabin and stood against injustice. As they prepared to go inside for the night, Nathan took one last look at the stars. Somewhere up there he liked to think Thomas was watching. Thomas, who died because Nathan couldn't save him, but whose death had taught Nathan the importance of keeping promises. And maybe Daniel Bennett was up there too, the man whose death had indirectly led to Nathan finding his purpose. Thank you, Nathan whispered to the stars, to the men who'd shaped him without ever meaning to. Thank you for the lessons. I'm trying to live up to them. Inside the cabin was warm and quiet. Nathan checked on Clara one more time, finding her sleeping peacefully, her small face relaxed and content. He straightened her blanket, then stood for a moment, just watching her breathe, marveling at the trust she'd placed in him. In their bedroom, Maggie was already under the covers, her eyes heavy with sleep. Nathan climbed in beside her, and she immediately curled against him, her pregnant belly pressed against his side. Nathan, she murmured drowsily, I never thanked you properly. For what? For staying, for fighting, for loving us, for being exactly the man we needed. He kissed the top of her head. You don't have to thank me for that. It's not a burden or a duty. It's a gift. You and Clara, you're the gift. And I'm grateful for you every single day. She was asleep within minutes, her breathing deep and even. But Nathan lay awake a while longer, thinking about the strange paths life takes, the unexpected turns that lead us to where we're meant to be. A year ago, he'd been a drifter with nothing but a horse and a handful of possessions, a man running from his past, from his failures, from the weight of promises broken. He'd stumbled onto this property by accident, driven by nothing more than the need to save his injured horse. But that accident had been his salvation. It had given him the chance to keep the promise he'd made over Thomas's grave. It had shown him that redemption was possible, that a man could change, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. He thought about Frank Dawson rotting in a prison cell, a man who'd chosen power and wealth over honor and community. Frank had owned more land, had more money, wielded more influence than Nathan could ever dream of. But in the end, he'd lost everything, because he'd built his life on fear and greed instead of on love and principle. Nathan had nothing but this cabin, this family, this growing community of people who'd been cast aside by the world. But he was rich beyond measure, because he'd built his life on the right foundation. As he finally drifted off to sleep, Nathan's last conscious thought was a simple one, a statement of fact that felt more true than anything he'd ever known. He was home. Finally, after 33 years of searching, Nathan Cole had found his way home. Not to a place, though this land would always be precious to him, but to a purpose, to a family, to a life that mattered. The cabin that had once been called cursed was now a beacon of hope. The land that had been stained with murder was now fertile ground for new beginnings. And the man who'd thought himself unworthy of love had become a father, a husband, a leader, and a guardian of everything good and right. In the morning he would wake up and begin another day of work, of building, of nurturing this community he'd helped create. There would be challenges ahead, he knew. Life was never without struggle. But he would face those challenges the way he'd faced everything since the night he decided to stay. With courage, with honor, and with the unwavering commitment to keep his promises no matter what the cost. Because in the end, that's what defined a man. Not his past, not his failures, but his choices, the promises he made, and the determination to keep them. Nathan Cole had made his choice, and he would spend the rest of his life proving that it was the right one. The story that had begun in a snowstorm with an injured horse and a desperate widow had transformed into something beautiful. a testament to the power of second chances, a proof that love could bloom even in the ashes of tragedy, a legacy that would endure for generations. And it all started with one simple decision made by a lonely cowboy who'd finally found something worth staying for.